Alrighty guys, so I wanted to make a video today. This is going to be a little bit of a longer format one, but today I wanted to go over some of the tools that are needed to get into tech work or working on guns or working on other people's guns. But today I want to go over some of like the essentials, I guess, or if you're starting out, this will kind of give you some guidance as far as what you might need or what you might come across when you start working on guns. But I'm going to start going through every single tool and we'll kind of talk about why and what it is and what it does. All right guys, so up first would be a number 1 or number 2 Phillips that is at least 8 inches long. And what this is good for is for the buffer tubes on most guns, and a lot of the gearbox screws use a Phillips style screw. Now some guns are different. They will use a Torx screw. Some even use Allen screws, but this is a good way to start. And you don't have to get the craziest sets of screwdrivers or the craziest screwdrivers, but you want to make sure you have a nice screwdriver so you don't round out the screws. You want to make sure it has a great lifetime warranty on it, so that way you don't have to wait for a new one to come in. You can instantly warranty it out. So like some of the great ones, obviously you can do like the Tecton ones. Those are a great option. Or if you have a tool truck that comes by, you can buy one of those if you're wanting to fork up the money for it. But there's definitely a lot of great screwdrivers on the market now, with that being said. But moving on to the next one. Another screwdriver that is equally important, especially if you're like me and you work on a lot of KDBAs, would be having like Torx screwdrivers. So for example, the KDBAs use a T10 Torx for all their gearboxes, at least all the ones I've ever worked on. It's been hundreds. So you want to make sure you have a nice T10 screwdriver. Super important. There are other guns, like I think the retro gearboxes, sometimes they have Torxes, sometimes they have hexes. But that's something you're going to run into. So you want to make sure you have a Torx set as well if you plan on getting like a KDBA or a retro gearbox. That's really the only ones I can think of off the top of my head that have the hexes. SEMAs have some of the hexes on like their pistol grips, but in like really weird places, but you're going to need a smaller set for that. Milwaukee makes a great set for that. They're really cheap, but another thing is Torxes for sure. All right, on to the next one. This is the most crucial part about working on airsoft guns, and one of the most crucial tools is you want to make sure that you have a nice set of hex keys. So these ones are actually really cheap. These are really cheap. Before, I've used the Weehaw ones. They're fantastic. They do have a lot smaller handles, but with these ones you want to make sure you have great hex keys, because if a screw is going to strip, it's probably going to be a hex screw. That's going to be the first screw that strips versus like a Phillips or a Torx, just because they're so cheap and how they're made for airsoft. So you want to make sure you have a nice set. These ones, when I bought them, they're like 30 bucks. These have a lifetime warranty and they're made in the US, but it's super important to have a nice set of hex keys, because that's 99% of your work that you do in airsoft is going to be using small hex keys. Moving on to the next thing that I'd recommend for starting out to work on guns is like a precision screwdriver set. So before I had these ones, I had like a little set of Milwaukee ones, and these are just like little small flatheads. And then you got even tinier flatheads. And then one of the most important thing is a number 0 Phillips. And there's definitely a lot of companies that make these. Again, like I said, you want to make sure you get at least a good quality one so you don't strip out the screws that you have. So don't go too cheap, but there's definitely some options. Like I said before, Tecton's a great option. I think Harbor Freight sells a set of these as well. The Icon ones are really nice for what it is, and they have a lifetime warranty. So stuff like that. So this is, again, another important thing to have. It's just for the smaller screws in the gearboxes, because you will run across it to where like on like 249s, you need a smaller flathead to adjust the screw, or putting in like a gate tighten, you want to make sure that you have a smaller Phillips head for most of the screws that go in for those. But moving on to the next one. So one thing I forgot about using these micro screwdrivers, and this is, I use this so often I kind of forget about it. But so like right here we have an old school VFC spring guide. So a lot of guns back in the day, they don't come with quick change springs. So if you have an older gun, you're probably going to figure this out pretty quick. Even some guns now don't. But what I use these for is for holding down the spring guide when you're taking the spring out of the gearbox. Especially if you put heavier springs in, it will launch across your house unless you have tension on it. So just another thing to use these for. So pretty cool. The next is going to be pick tools. This is good for getting out O-rings, putting on tappet springs. There's a lot of like small uses you might not think of until you get a set of these. There are definitely other great options on the market. So as far as like pick tools go, we used to have a dental pick tool set that we got from Harbor Freight, and it works really good for what it is. So you could try with one of those. Those are fantastic, especially for airsoft, because the picks get so small. But again, It's really hard to go wrong with the pick tools, but you want to make sure that you have a nice set of pick tools. Having longer ones is kind of convenient for random scenarios, but you could use one of those dental ones and probably get away with it for quite some time. Alrighty, the next thing would be punches. Super important, super utilized tool whenever you're working on airsoft guns for sure. But punches are super important. These are going to be used a lot for like receiver pins, or these are going to be used for the trigger pins, or it's going to be used for the front sight posts on some guns where they have the roll pins that are in the in the barrel. But these are super important. Make sure you have a nice set of these, and make sure you have different sizes. You don't want to put too big of a punch through a small sized hole, or you will crack something. I have seen people crack receivers before by using too big of a punch. It does happen, but you want to make sure that you're using the correct tool for the job. That way you don't give yourself a headache. Next is like a general set of screwdrivers. I kind of use these as pry bars a lot. So like the flatheads get used as pry bars, or they get used as hammers. Get a cheap set. You're gonna break them a lot. I think these ones were less than 20 bucks when I bought them. I haven't broken these ones yet, but I've definitely broken a lot of screwdrivers over the years. So you just, again, make sure you have a great warranty on these ones. You just buy another one. But again, a general set of screwdrivers can be really helpful. But yeah. Now, if you plan on installing rails or taking off flash hiders and such, an AR tool is pretty fantastic to have. This is an old school NC Star one we have. As you can see, it's been used as a hammer more often than not. But the one that I have no freaking clue where it is, but there's like a little peg that goes here. These are great for putting on like Daniel Defense rails. And then these are great for taking off the Delta rings for the front end on like those old school KDBAs, or any kind of clamshell gun. And these are great for flash hiders. So you just want to make sure that you have, again, like the right tool for the job. These are really cheap, and these are like steel. You can use it as a hammer as well. That's just really whatever's in your hand. You'll use a hammer first, but there's another fantastic option to have. This is one of the biggest parts, is pliers. So going from left to right, there's not a whole lot of uses for linemen's in airsoft other than a hammer. Now they have, at least this one has, where you can cut the screws on it, which can be useful if you need to do that. The next, obvious channel locks, you can definitely see where this will come in for use. Again, any set is great. I know Harbor Freight has a lot of them, so you get those if you want. I just like the way I like the grips on the Milwaukee ones. Now for the needle nose, I probably use these the most out of my pliers, this and the cutters. So the needle nose, these are great for getting motors out of grips if they're a little snug in there. Obviously, if it's too snug, there's a problem, but these are great for that, or getting into smaller places. You can get smaller needle nose as well, or like the little dental needle nose. They're like little clamp sets, but small pair of channel locks, I probably never use this one. It just came in a set. The cutters, I use this a lot for sure. Cutting wires or cutting like zip. People have a bunch of stuff taped onto their gun all the time, but cutting small things off like that. Or I've used this to cut the pegs off of gearbox shells, or I use this for cutting tappet flags, stuff like that. Now for the vice grips, it's a bad day usually when you have to use vice grips for airsoft, because something is really stuck. Use this for getting like barrel extensions off people's guns sometimes if it's to the point where it's like seized up. There's definitely other ways you can go about doing that, and they make little rubber covers for these, so it just depends. It's not often I have to use a pair of these, but when it does, it's usually a bad day. And then it's just a smaller set. These are great for, this is also great for like holding on to stuff as well. So if you're trying to hold something still, some people use these for soldering too. Adjustable wrenches. It's pretty cut and dry. You can use this for flash hiders. There's definitely some flash hiders that won't work on the AR tool, but this will be great for it. Some rails I use this on. I use this pretty often though, for like putting on parts for people. So this is also a great option to have. All right, so the next is going to be a lot of people's favorite topic, hammers. There's plenty of kinds. This one I don't get to use super often, but this one I use pretty often. This can be used for taking out the pins for trigger pins or whatever. Sometimes you need a harder hammer. We do have a smaller one at the shop. I have no freaking clue where it is. It's a lot smaller than this, and it comes with a punch set that I was mentioning earlier, and has a hard side on it. This is great for smacking the pins in without using a punch, just because it's like a rubber, so it won't damage the receiver or anything like that. This is for like something's really on there, but again, not super often you have to use something like this, but these are a great thing to have in your collection. This is a niche thing, and we're not going to go into all of it today, but this is a super basic niche thing. Sometimes you might need these. These are really crappy ones. You can get nicer ones from Rubber Freight. These have been in the shop since I've been here. But having calipers, this gives you measurements for things. We do a lot of custom 3D printed stuff for customers now, so it is good to measure things out correctly. You might have to make adjustments, but it is good to have those micro measurements for small things like that. I don't use this for shimming or anything like that. I really just use it for the 3D printed stuff for the most part, and sometimes if I'm measuring nozzle lengths. That's about it. Next one's gonna be brushes. There's definitely different uses for all these brushes, so you make sure that you're informed before using them. A lot of times they use the nylon brushes. These were like $2 at Harbor Freight for this whole set. These are super fantastic to have. Sometimes I use this for like cleaning out gearboxes. Now I have an ultrasonic cleaner, but it is still good for getting things out of gearboxes that are really in there. But there's definitely a lot of great uses for these guys. Or cleaning off threads, even when you have a bunch of glue on threads. This is another great thing to have for your collection. The next thing, you got a Dremel. If you're a good airsoft tech, you probably use this a lot. 99.99% of parts probably will not fit in the gearbox that you have. You're going to have to modify it. Most parts aren't drop-in. You're going to have to do work to get it to work correctly. So having a good Dremel, I used to have a corded Dremel, like a brushed one. After you do it for so long, you do change tools over the years, but the brush one did great work for me. I just wanted something that was cordless and then brushless, but having the corded Dremel is going to be a huge step up, especially when you need to modify stuff versus using a file set to try to do it, and it takes forever. But another great thing to have. All right, so I went through a lot of like the basic essential stuff. There were some things that are not super necessary that I went over in the video. But a lot of the basic essential stuff to get you guys going. There is a lot of like niche special items. If you really want to get into it, you can pick up over time. But for getting started, like the simple things like the screwdrivers and the hex keys and like a simple pair of pliers, like the needle nose and the cutters like I was mentioning. That'll get you through most of the guns you have to work on, and obviously like a punch set. But there's definitely some things you don't need right away. If you get more into it and you want to keep doing it and you want to keep working on guns, those are just some of the tools that I listed that were a little more niche. If you guys want a video on more specific like special use tools, then I can go over that. But this will hopefully get you guys going as far as in the right direction. All right, peace.